With me today, I have a guest that I think you're going to find quite interesting. His name is Marshall Lefferts, and Marshall is the founder of an organization called the Harmonic Science Alliance, and he's the author of a book called Cosmometry, and we will probably talk a little bit about the book in the course of this conversation, but it's quite a fascinating book, and we could spend the whole hour talking about that, but we're going to talk about more than just that. Um, and so, welcome, Marshall.
Thank you so much, Ray. I really appreciate the invitation and look forward to this conversation with you.
Very good. Yes. Well, I love what you're doing, and I haven't read your whole book yet. I've read it. I read the first part and selected chapters. I haven't found time to read it all. I do want to read it. And what is very impressive about this book is that it has a theory that goes quite into depth about the nature of the universe. And so we will explore that a bit today in this conversation. But the primary conversation will center around this topic, how we can change the world by raising our consciousness. Human consciousness as a collective or individually, we each can have an effect. So let's dive in here. And I do want to, I guess I'll start by asking you it sounds like you've got digging into the nature of the universe a long, long time ago and exploring it over many years. And I assume that that's what ultimately came to be in your book. Tell us about it and explain the subtitle as well.
Okay, I will. Um, my journey did begin many years ago. When I was 19 years old, I had a experience that popped me into a different state of consciousness that was actually emotional driven. Um, and I write about that in the book for those who are interested in that experience. But
Mhm.
um, it it awakened in me an awareness of something bigger going on, and I had a few very seminal experiences immediately following it. One of which was by my intuition being guided to read a book called Intuition by Buckminster Fuller,
Huh.
and that book just popped my awareness about the bigger thing going on open in a really great way. And I became a big fan of Buckminster Fuller's work. That was in 1977, or sorry, 78. And had the good fortune of meeting Bucky Fuller in 79 when he came and spoke at the campus I was in college at. And so with Bucky's influence, I became aware that there's a bigger evolutionary phenomenon going on this planet, a transitional time, and he was dedicated to how he could really kind of understand the nature of the cosmos and then bring it into practical application to benefit life on the planet. And that set a real foundation in me of like, well, that makes sense. That's a good path to pursue. Um, And then I also had my own personal experiences in nature where I started to see some fundamental patterns that exist in nature, especially this one I call the double spiral pattern, which is what you see in sunflowers and
Mhm.
cactus, things like that. Um, and so over the course of about 20 years, I did kind of my own study in nature, observation, in Bucky Fuller's work, in what they call sacred geometry, um, writings and presentations, trying to see like how does this all fit together. And and then in the early 2000s, I met two of my colleagues and mentors and dear friends. Foster Gamble, who is the creator of the Thrive documentary films that I helped to produce, and Nassim Haramein, who I believe is the most advanced physicist in the world, although not recognized as such yet, but hopefully soon, because his physics is truly a unified physics model and is extremely accurate in kind of deriving solutions to the big questions in physics. And so when I met them, a whole big bunch of more layers started to come into the picture more clearly for me as I had conversations in the physics and the geometry, the cosmic geometry part, and then being a musician my whole life, having studied classical music theory from 8 to 13 years old, I had
Oh,
a knowledge of the music system that I came to realize the cosmic geometry that Bucky Fuller was referring to and the Simharmain refers to, and the dynamics of the patterns in nature that I was observing, and the ratios that are involved with that, and the musical system. Wow, they all are actually coming together as one whole thing. They fit together perfectly. And when I had that realization, it became, clear that there was a story to tell. Let's put it that way. So it took many, many years of preparation and a few years of writing to write my book Cosmometry. And the subtitle is Exploring the Holofractal Nature of the Cosmos. And that is referring to the first section of the book is called Wholeness. And so I'm speaking to different qualities of what we call wholeness, one of which is the holographic nature, or which I like to call hologrammic. Holographic being the field of light, the visual experience is absolutely 100% holographic, not recognized as such in mainstream science yet, but without a doubt, in my mind, it's completely holographic. Um, Hologrammic meaning that the informational field, which then down the road in this conversation, we could tie that into consciousness a bit more. But that informational field has the same property of the information of the whole being present at every point in the universe. Therefore, like you said, this unification uh, of everything is a literal physical phenomenon in the universe. The hologrammic nature is means that all the information is everywhere throughout the entire universe. Therefore, it knows itself entirely at all points and in its wholeness. So that's the holographic wholeness, and then the fractal is in the word holofractal, it's got the holographic and fractal. And that is, I define it very simply as the same pattern repeats across all scales. And we can see that in nature very easily, just spirals unto themselves. You see across all scales in nature this toroidal flow dynamic, which is fundamental pattern of how energy organizes coherently, also scales across the universe. So exploring the holofractal nature of the cosmos is exploring the nature of wholeness as a unified system through the lenses of the cosmic geometry, the unified physics and music, and the informational field of consciousness as one unified expression. So that's what the
wow.
book.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, very impressive. What a what an undertaking that it's interesting how we evolve in our life choices and how that shows up in our life. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, for me, things began to happen that I, well, for many, many years, I was an atheist, but raised as a Catholic originally. And then one day, something very powerful happened for me that I would describe as a spiritual awakening. But it led me to realize the universe must be whole and conscious and also personal as well. And so I set off on an exploration of trying to understand that. And of course, one of the things that I learned early on was that, well, the belief that there is one consciousness that is the source of everything in the physical universe. And so that influenced me a lot. And I think from what I've read in cosmometry, uh, it provides a view that, an understanding that confirms that. Um, and, it goes very much deeper than that. And how that can even be possible, and I know that one of the interesting things in your book is I think it's got the first real explanation I've seen of that really explains how our vision works and how it can work.
Mhm.
There's I've read very interesting things over the years, that people raise questions about. It doesn't quite make sense the way we think of it normally with all these photons coming and
Mhm.
how it all fits together. But the book provides an explanation. So we're not going to
Mhm.
go into that, but I do want to
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about consciousness um, as a starting point to dive into this because I 5 years ago I started a podcast. It changed names a couple of times, but it was Our Spiritual Life. And I'm no longer recording episodes on that podcast. It, it was about spirituality very broadly. But for the last 2 years plus, something like that, 2 years, my podcast is New Ways of Being. And the focus has been on being, how we, as conscious beings, how we operate in the world and what our consciousness means to us and how it originates and how it expresses. And so I've learned that consciousness and beingness, and maybe the only distinction I make there is beingness is, to me, is consciousness fully embodied, because our body is a very important aspect of ourselves as physical beings and of the universe as a whole. And so I kind of started out on one path exploring that, exploring consciousness and awakening and beingness. And it's taken on a whole different life, a whole
Mhm.
different direction that I would have anticipated when I started. And that was
Mhm.
because I made the choice to focus more on the experiences of consciousness, the experience of awakening, the
Mhm.
experience of, what we're experiencing in beingness,
Mhm.
and how much control do we have that governs how awake we are to the reality around us. So that has led to this book that I'm in the process of creating, and with the cooperation of yourself and 20 plus more people, because I want to have a broad perspective about what consciousness is and how we can uh, understand that we have more power to change our lives and the world around us than a lot of people understand. So, and that's the goal of the book, to raise that consciousness in readers and hopefully do it in such a way that it may get more attention to help say, hey, we can change the world. We don't have to live with this fairly screwed up world that we are living in right now.
Mhm.
And so I hope you agree that that's a worthy cause.
I do.
Yes. So let's just talk a bit more about consciousness then. Um, at, um, the an expression that I learned from Jude Currivan, I think when I interviewed her a couple of years ago, actually,
Mhm.
um, she talked about she had a very strong scientific background and in education involving cosmology and quantum physics. And she had come to the understanding and wrote a book about it of that the universe is an entity, a wholeness that is conscious, is unified, and evolves. And those are all important aspects of the nature of the universe. Well, from my research and my learning, I agree with that totally. And and she talked about some physicists having won the I'm drawing a blank of the name of the award now, but the big uh,
Nobel.
yeah, I think it's a Nobel Prize for Physics. Yes, based on proving that what had been believed to be characteristics at only the smallest level of the quantum physics principles were actually applicable to all
Mhm.
scales in the universe, up to the full cosmological scales. And but what I never completely understood was, um, it was clear that she had studied things and talked to some selected physicists that they were, theorizing how the nature of the universe worked and how consciousness was something that was a part of it, not something that was, uh, like some kind of mysterious result
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
physical operation and material operation.
Mhm.
So, yeah, what have you learned? I know that there, like the physicists you cited in particular, Nassim Haramein
Mhm.
has written papers with other unified physicists that that explain the current unified theory. So, just give us a very quick view of your
Mhm.
understanding of that.
Okay. Yeah, I first of all really appreciate what you said of what Jude Curvin shared, which I totally agree with as well. And also the great physicist David Bohm, he came to realize that we need to look at the problems of understanding the nature of the universe through a perspective of wholeness. And if that is going to be true all the way true, then the physical universe and let me turn off this so it doesn't make noise. The physical universe and the um, consciousness that we have as our way of observing and experiencing it have to then be considered as unified and whole. And and I agree with that as well. And so there's a reorientation, I believe, in the human in the logical human mind that has been pretty much kind of trained in the modern era to take things apart and look at the parts.
Mhm.
It hasn't been trained so much to synthesize and look at the whole. It's changing now, and I think it's changing pretty rapidly now. Um, so with the premise of a unified universe that consciousness intelligence is intrinsic to the entirety of it and that it's evolving, therefore it's learning and growing and changing, the 3 points that Jude makes. The question is, well, what's a model that supports that, to
Mhm.
be
Right,
true?
right.
And so my understanding in this holofractal framework is uh, that what we call energy and matter, we know that they're basically the same thing, and
Mhm.
it's understanding and that sameness goes across all scales, in my opinion. That's the holofractal nature of it. It's not going to be different at some scale and completely different at the other without
Mhm.
any unifying relationship. And and so you have the energy and matter experience, let's just put it that way, in the unit phenomenon in the universe. And then there's the informational component. To me, that's sort of a the nature of the relational component. Everything is in relationship to everything else, whether it's in a local relational dynamic or a non-local unified universal relational dynamic. It's always relational. As soon as it comes out of the 0 point state into manifestation, it's in relationship to everything else. And the informational aspect is this relational, base of knowledge, let's put it that way. And um, and so, like what I said, it's intrinsic to the entire structure, the whole framework of the universe across all the scales is um, is intelligent in that regard, and it has local and non-local awareness, including physicists like David Bohm would observe the behavior of plasma, which is the free protons and electrons that are not associated with atomic and molecular structures that makes up 99% of the universe,
Hmm.
uh, has behaviors that go into collective movement that are exhibiting a kind of collective intelligence that is unexpected. And that's just an example of acknowledging, okay, let's hold this premise to be true, that the informational field is a field of intelligence that permeates the entire system in the physical universe, not only a metaphysical idea, literally in the interactions of the what we call the physical universe. And and the key component of the evolutionary aspect of it, the evolving aspect of it, is this feedback loop process. And that's what enables, so the feedback is, you could say, a local entity feeding back with its local environment, like we do all the time
Hmm.
in our experience. We have our range of influence and being influenced by the environment. And then the non-local unified field also intimately involved in the feedback process, so that the entire universe is being informed by our experience and our behavior, and then we are being informed by the entire universal feedback. No, we're not consciously aware of it. We'd be entirely overwhelmed in our consciousness if we
Right.
became aware of that level of the feedback loop. We are aware of it in our daily lives and in our experience of the the nature of awareness, as being a feedback loop process. And so um, then I guess maybe the last piece for this first touching into this question is, um, there's a there's a spectrum of like complexity that cross scales that this whole informational field, energy, matter, and feedback loop process is occurring at each scale. And um, therefore, there are different frameworks of perspective that of what we call consciousness and intelligence. So if we try to equate it to human consciousness and intelligence as being the benchmark, I think we're just kidding ourselves. It's a little bit silly and maybe a little arrogant if we hold to it too much. Like you were talking about the embodiment, having a body, and really bringing that conscious awareness into the full experience of being a human in the body. That's a framework of perception.
Hmm.
And it's a good one for our experience, and it's a wonderful one in when it is. It can be a very challenging one in this human world. And but it's also extremely beautiful. And yet it's only one perspective, one framework in the spectrum of possible frameworks. And so this is where we don't want to collapse it into such a limited way of looking at
Yes.
reality and say, this is it. And if it doesn't look like this, then we're confused.
Yes.
So, so beyond that, it's really this, you could say, kind of a nested unified fractal system of these frameworks of intelligent systems of awareness and consciousness that
Yes,
permeates the whole thing. Yeah.
that's that was a great explanation, Marshall. Very good. Because I know we're yeah, and you can definitely see it if you pick up his book and read it. Um, this is when you look at the whole picture, is there's a complexity to it. There's a lot of pieces that all fit together. But you summarize that very well. And a couple of points I really liked there was one, you mentioned that it's a very dynamic kind of process, which I think is very important. I might express it in seeing the universe as a living entity, not just this static
Mhm.
material world, but something much more than that. And you also mentioned David Bohm as a key influence for you. He was for me as well. I read the book um, Wholeness and the Implicate Order quite a long time ago, and definitely influenced my thinking of the time. And it was probably a factor that led me to write a book that I wrote called Awakening to Wholeness. And that was my own experience of
Mhm.
awakening to wholeness in actually, looking back on it, kind of a limited extent. Wholeness is a pretty big subject, and
Mhm.
we could spend the whole hour talking about wholeness. But I think that's that's important, though. Wholeness is a very important aspect of understanding our place in the universe. That we are a part of something that's a great whole, and in fact, the consciousness of the universe is a great whole. It all goes together, and um, I think that's important because we, even though we might think about our relationship to the world and to other people, that in terms of pieces, people, each person is separate from other, each other person uh, physically. Um, and, how do we gain a perspective of the wholeness that is underneath, that
Mhm.
is not necessarily visible?
Mhm.
So, and you kind of touched on that, and you might have some comments just on that point.
Well, I would just say there's an interesting phenomenon that I believe is very real in the evolution of our perspective, our framework, which is I at times call it switching on the holographic mind, because the nature of a hologram where the information of the whole is present at every point becomes, I mean, there's a logic there, but to actually envision it and take it in and what that actually means in the physical universe and in the informational universe, it becomes nonlinear.
Right.
And so you have to be able to hold a nonlinear state of awareness in order to see wholeness and see wholeness for what it is, and then look at these characteristics and then see them as, yes, operational in the universal field. And so there's how, like I said, the educational system and the current modern era of pursuit has been so divisional and mechanistic and looking at parts, and
Mhm.
so we're not innately born into and trained into that state of awareness. And so there's a switching on that has to take place. And it happens however it happens for anybody. I can offer what I can in a book like mine, and if it sparks that, oh, now I can see it, then great. Um, I think Bucky Fuller was the one that really kicked me off, because he always his basic kind of premise was start with universe and then remove the irrelevancies when it comes to problem solving. You basically start with the entirety of the whole, and then you remove the things that are not relevant to your inquiry. And that was like, that's an interesting approach. So some comments about that. Yeah.
Well, for this book, one of the key points that I've struggled with in trying to bring this together is that, if people were to see that we truly are a part of a whole, then it could begin to change our perspective about how we relate to other people.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard like some spiritual teachers, talk about that we are one whole. We are all interconnected. I loved your term of how we're relational um, throughout. The universe is relational throughout. And
Mm-hmm.
if people could have a stronger sense of that, and to see then that every person is in effect an extension of them, or we could say we're all extensions of the intelligent universe.
Yeah.
How do we help people understand that? Now, one way is to talk about our humanity, our shared humanity, and that we share life on this planet, and that we need to have a more holistic view about that
Right.
in order to take care of ourselves and the planet. And another way might be to talk about, well, for 100 and however many years it is now, 130 years, uh, quantum physicists have known that we and everything originates out of a unified field. Most people call it the quantum field, but they probably don't. Most people don't know what that really means. But if they would accept that truth, that's one way to maybe begin to communicate it. But so I think that ends up being something that's significant, or at least at some level, because well, I talk about that. What I've learned in my study of consciousness is I believe we are very much driven by our own personal consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And how we behave in the world reflects our consciousness. Our consciousness is, another way of saying it is worldview. It We express our view of the world through our behaviors and how we what we believe about ourselves and about the world. But um, I think it's well. I guess what I was going to say is I talk about we've come to a time where we need to shift from a consciousness of separation to a consciousness of unity.
Mm-hmm.
And I could elaborate that and say much more, but at one simple level, we believe that we're separate from everybody else. We're separate from some people think we're even separate from the planet and we don't have to take care of it, which is idiotic. And
Yeah.
that we're separate from God or the whole intelligence of the universe. And if we could shift that to understand that no, we are unified, then we could start, I think, behaving in a way that reflects unity instead of separation.
Yeah. Absolutely agree with you. That is the edge we're on at this moment, and it's the beauty of the advancement of the science that recognizes the unity and the wholeness and the attributes that we can describe scientifically. And people like Bohm and Nassim Haramein and numerous others are really defining the physics of that truth. And the beauty of that is it's through science affirming of the spiritual perspective that has been, foundational to spiritual philosophies, the unity and oneness and wholeness and uh, the illusion of separation, which that is an illusion, and
Yes.
it doesn't mean there's a functional usefulness to perceiving the individuated components of reality. It helps us navigate when we're walking around and driving and things like that. Um, and again, it's just been the paradigm of science and education has been the opposite of that, based on separation and distinction, without including the unified wholeness part of it. And so this bringing in now of unified awareness and a science of unity and a science of wholeness, and having physical mechanisms that really define and describe these aspects that we have had direct experience of through our spiritual experiences. Um, it's basically the unifying of our whole psyche, you could say.
Uh-huh.
The spiritual, metaphysical, and the scientific, logical that have for so long been like, well, they don't go together.
Right.
And what a silly thing that is to say. How could they not be one and the same
Right.
ultimately? And so that we're at that threshold, it feels like, where, enough of the acceptance of that nature of reality to be true has come into the field of consciousness. And, thanks to some pioneers from the scientific side of it, dimension of it, really digging into, well, what's the physical mechanism that would be at play that would show that to be true. And that's the beauty of what's happening now. And that's why we're at this threshold, because once you have that understanding and you bring that into the world, the human mind, the logical human mind that has been confused about that question for a long time, like, really? Is it really one? Is it really unified? It's been very confused and questioning. No
Yes.
longer is it confusion. It comes out of confusion and becomes unified with the spiritual direct knowing that that's true.
Yeah.
When that happens, you have an integrated psyche, and that's a key of what the threshold we're on right now.
Well, I think you are playing a very important role in what you're doing and helping to share an understanding of what's really going on because um, it is uh, complex in some ways, and there's a lot to be understood. I mean, if you kind of step back, I would say, well, it simplifies, at a fundamental level. It's also starting from a simple viewpoint. But at any rate, well, I think you're touching on something there. Let's go in a slightly different direction now. And that's the direction of energy resonance and coherence and um, and in everything you've been doing with your harmonic science alliance, and um, and of course you have a background with music as I do. That
Mhm.
we understand some things about harmony and what that might imply. And one of the things that's going on in the world right now that I think is useful is there are efforts to promote global coherence through the work of Heart Math Institute and um, various other organizations. There's some global coherence events that are happening this weekend. But talk about your perspective, from that point of view, resonance and coherence and how that comes into play.
Mhm. Okay, great. These are attributes of the dynamics of energy and matter, and therefore also consciousness. Let's not separate them at all. Like energy,
Right.
matter, information, consciousness. These are attributes that we have come to realize are fundamental to how the universe organizes and is ordered in such a way that it's it's stable basically, or not just only stable, but it comes into stable wholeness at in localized expressions, whether that's from the atomic realm into the to the molecular and in the biological systems, the cellular, the organs, the entire systems, and then into the ecosystems and planetary systems, galactic systems. The same phenomena of interaction. So to kind of give it more context, these are attributes of the interactions of energy dynamics. And so, the idea of this quantum world is, I think it's very misunderstood, as you said. I think it's extremely simple in its origins, and it was called that because Max Planck and Einstein and others came to realize at that time that energy, and specific electromagnetic energy, and of course, same with acoustic energy, comes in little wave form packets. And they went, oh, it's not just a continuous flow, it's actually little packets of energy. They called the quantum of action, little quanta. And so they called it quantum mechanics. And then it became this whole big mysterious thing that became more esoteric in people's ideas of what that means. But fundamentally, it just means energy is organizing in wave forms, basically. And that is true across all scales. And so it's not just a tiny little scale that quantum phenomena is happening, it's at all scales. And so all that to say that the interaction of all that is based on what we have come to observe and we call the system of music, which is not something we invented. We discovered it by tuning in and teasing out, the ratios and all that. Um, and so it all is operating harmonically at that point. When you get to I don't know if it's the ultimate deduction, but one of the endpoints of realization is that all that light energy and sound energy and whatever gravitational energy, which are all one and the same thing anyway, they are all interacting and organizing and being ordered harmonically. And those attributes of the harmonic system are resonance and dissonance and consonance. And when something is coming into resonant wholeness, it's a coherence of the energy. It's literally cohering into a stable structure. And
Mhm.
so, and that's what creates all physical, universal phenomena, as well as the energetic ones, which are operating in you can't separate them again. This is part of the challenge of language, is we keep trying to like one and the other. Um, and so these are fundamental attributes of the organizing principle of the universe. And so I came to in recent years really contextualize that awareness in what I call harmonic science, acknowledging this basic paradigm of understanding that then informs all the rest. If we really consider that this is truly a foundational premise, then it informs physics and biology and chemistry, and you go on from there, because resonance, coherence, frequency, vibration is fundamental, and therefore the harmonic structure is fundamental. So yeah, that's how I look at it now.
Yeah, I got involved with crystals in the last couple of years, and I was very surprised to discover that I could sense real uh, energy of coherence from
Mhm.
crystals, which I would have before I would have said, no, that's not possible. But I now believe it is possible. And so let's talk about that just a little bit more. So coherence, um, so coherence, if we talk about global coherence and bringing human beings into greater coherence in our thinking and in our behavior.
Mhm.
Um, it does acoustic effects still apply at that level, at the level of people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's again, um, we don't want to, well, let's put it the other way. We want to look at these questions from the perspective of the wholeness
Right.
rather than, you know, does something apply or not at different levels? Anything that is actually coming from a unified um, paradigm that is in integrity with its, you know, the truth of whatever that we're talking about, in this case, coherence and energetic influences and the acoustics, um, will always apply throughout the entire system called the universe. We are part of that. And we there's a increasing knowledge about how profound that influence is actually, and in some ways, especially the acoustic, as you highlighted, this acoustical sound based,
Mhm.
attribute of the energy dynamics influences the physical universe, and if we put it in relation to our bodies, sound and acoustics permeate into the entire body system, whereas light goes in a little bit, into the surface, goes into the tissues a bit. I do believe the informational component of light goes into the whole body, yeah, at a, in this hologramic way. But sound as a physical vibratory phenomenon permeates everything, and it goes around corners, and it's really filling up all space and going internal and external. And it's a profound influence, and it's so key right now because it ties into really kind of the nature of our experience of um, beings who communicate with sound and who
Yep.
would receive it and
That's
express it.
a good
And so
point.
then how are we doing that? What are we saying? How are we saying it? How are we holding the value of this harmonizing principle, this coherence generating principle, uh, and dynamic in a way that recognizes the importance of it. Again, I think it's another threshold we're on because I think both in the modern world, the current sort of expressions of sound and electromagnetism have a lot of distortions in them, and distortions that are because of the complex mess of frequencies that we're bathing in all the time, and in the realms of the acoustic, I find a lot of noise in the world and a lot of unpleasant sound being generated. These affect our psyche. And so it's a little bit of a conflict to try to find
Mhm.
ways to get our nervous systems out of this. Um, it creates stress in many cases, and that stress can create imbalances and disease and things like that. Um, so the idea of coherence, especially when you think about like heart math, as you mentioned, and the synchronizing of the brain and heart, and I would
Mhm.
include the gut as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
The this dynamic of electrical and acoustic, because it's been discovered and investigated more in recent years that the nervous system communicates acoustically as well,
Wow.
which is very interesting, as do all the cells in and amongst themselves. And so when those systems come into synchronization, again, this is a harmonic phenomenon because it's rhythmic and frequency and resonance based. When they come into synchronization, we experience this coherence in our body, our emotion, our mind, as one unified whole. And to extend that into your question about then the global coherence, which there's that great term, the noosphere,
Mhm.
which is you think of it as just the collective, whole collective field of in consciousness, human consciousness and plant and animal consciousness and the planetary consciousness. Um, it has been shown, and I write about it in my book, a chapter called Cohering the Noosphere, about we have good evidence now that it's all unified and the actions at any place in the world affect the entire noosphere. And so when you think about the chaotic, stress-inducing elements in our modern societal experience, the question is how do we mitigate that, change it, harmonize it in such a way that the whole field can just relax, basically, come out of stress and become coherent as a whole. And that's really, in my mind, one of the key quests we're on at this time is to cohere the noosphere through the heart math techniques and through sound and light technologies that will help our nervous systems and our biological systems come out of stress. Same in the environment, same in agriculture, and in many ways in the world.
When I interviewed Brian Swim and Monica, the co-author of their book on the story of the noosphere,
Mm.
um, they we kind of touched on the question, is the noosphere how organized is it at this point? Is it intelligent? Is it awake? Or can it come into awakening? And I kind of hear you saying, well, if we would help contribute to greater coherence, that may truly be. Is that would
Oh,
you?
I absolutely think so. Yeah. I actually think this is the process we're in specifically at this time. Now, whether it's to what degree it's being consciously pursued or is happening without our conscious awareness, but it's still happening. And the way I see it playing out is you have this relationship between let's just call it the chaos of of the noosphere, um, and then the truth is that we live in a global, and although that's very challenged in the Earth systems right now, but when you get out into the planetary and more of the celestial cosmic, and even into the small scales as well, it's already coherent and harmonized. It's like we're just a little localized experience of this disharmony and uh, incoherence and chaos because we've created systems and ways of sort of expressing our experience of reality that are very confused and very conflicted, and going to extreme right now. And so, and the way I see it is that the good news is that as it goes to extreme, it becomes more obvious to more people that there's something wrong because a lot of people hadn't begun to question that yet. Some of us
Yes,
started questioning it a long time ago.
yes,
And more people are just now seeing like the incongruencies and the cognitive dissonance between what's being said to us and what we actually can see is, happening. And that's a key driver in what I would call the awakening process into a higher perspective and simultaneously the perspectives of wholeness and the science of wholeness and unification and harmonic science are coming in to meet those awakening,
yes.
inquiring minds. And so I see it as an inevitable outcome, because it's really kind of the only place left to go at this point. You can't keep going into chaos and destruction Otherwise, we won't be here and it
Right.
will still go back into a harmonized state.
Right.
So that's the way I look at it.
Well, thank you. We've covered quite a bit of ground here, and I was just looking at some of my notes that I had scribbled out, and some very pointed kind of questions
Yeah.
that you've answered. If someone were to ask, is there a guiding consciousness or intelligence to the
Hmm.
whole universe? You almost began with that. So
Mm.
uh,
Hmm.
we've
Yeah.
answered that. But let's come back to the question of how, through raising our human consciousness, we can impact the world. We can change the world to the better.
Mhm.
And so, what you were just saying there, I think, brings up some very good points about how that can happen.
Mm.
But yeah, let's just maybe say it in some other ways. Um, what kind of guidance would you give to listeners of,
Mhm.
how do we bring greater coherence into our lives? How do we bring greater wholeness? How do we raise our consciousness and thereby make a difference in the world?
Wow. Yeah.
Big
Yeah,
question.
there's many ways to consider that. Um, so there's a couple of angles that are coming to my mind. I think it's healthy and good to be aware of what's going on in the world. And like I stopped watching TV 40 something years ago
Mhm.
because I realized it wasn't telling me things that were useful, and it was actually telling me things that were incorrect and
Right.
wrong and deceitful even. Um, and so I think there's a necessity to basically dissociate from what I just call the contrived human world, that a lot of its contrived nature right now is based on false premises.
Mhm.
And it's also based on a heck of a lot of corruption and deceit and horrific behavior
Right.
that we don't want to have as part of the human psyche on the other side of this transition.
Right.
There's the spiritual ideal of peace and harmony and love and creating we can not have to create, we can restore our relationship to this beautiful paradise planet that we live on. And it will quickly come back into that state because it wants to be in that state. Um, and so there's that perspective of dissociating from it. And once you get enough of a dissociation from all that turbulence, you can start to get yourself centered. There are the techniques through heart math or through meditation and breathwork techniques and things that can help to relieve the stress of the nervous systems. I think that's a big piece of it that I would highlight as well, is that uh, in general, the nervous systems of human beings are quite stressed out at this time. And there are technologies and methodologies that can do a great job of relieving the stress within nervous systems, basically restoring coherence through sound and light and other kinds of these kinds of methodologies. And so it's very important to help to assist that process en masse, however that is going to happen. And when that happens, then the biological systems get out of stress, and things like pain or disease or emotional stress and all of that, hormonal stress, will also start to ease out. And so there's a process of um, relieving the stress levels,
Right.
which we can consciously choose to do and bring into the world, and I think is a necessity. And when then that happens, then it allows for this other, or for the deeper layers of our sense of self. and perception of the world to have a kind of the chance to come to see the world in its wholeness, in its
Right.
unity, in its love, in its peace, in its harmony, and then choose that direction. And I think again we're at the very big threshold point, and to me that's the direction and one of the processes for accelerating coming into coherence is to take out the decoherent, stressful elements as much as possible.
Very good. Excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed in your book, in the chapter about human experience,
Hmm.
um, you and I agree very much about the importance of understanding love and joy in our
Hmm.
lives. I had selected out those two um, states of consciousness or emotions, or however you want to view them, as
Hmm.
being so very important. And of course, in spiritual terms, love has many different meanings, but I do believe that seeking love and seeking joy um, are both very important in our lives as well.
Mm.
And in the world, expressed in the world is also very important.
Yeah, it's essential. It's essential because these are essential. Um, these are, I would say, the words we use to describe the essential nature of who we are, and you could say the essential nature of all that is. When you put it in the context of who we are, um, I'd like to say when you peel away all the other layers, the psychological distortions and confusions and stresses and things like that. Let's just imagine all of that is peeled away. Well, what's left is a being that's in the state of what we call love and joy. And so this is the fundamental true nature of our beings. Whether we're in a physical body or not, it's the true nature of the foundational, when coherence and resonance and integration is present, which it is actually everywhere in the universe, ultimately, we call those, love, which is the accepting and embracing and unifying
Mhm.
connection, and joy, which is the celebration of that
Ex-
radiating out
Expansive. Yeah.
expansively, and they're just the two expressions of the same experience. That's our true nature, and that's the true nature of all things. And so it's a absolutely essential piece. And I'll just say one more thing that I've said over the years is that um, we, especially in the spiritual communities, have focused so much on love, which is great, of course, it's very important. Um, and in my mind, what is really out of balance is the lack of joy. And so that to bring our attention into, well, what is the experience of joy, and how do we embody and bring that into the world? You know, basically, love being this attractive force, joy being the radiating force. Again, one and the same, two expressions of the same thing. That we have an imbalance, you could say, in the direction of love, and there's a reason for the importance of pursuing that and bringing it into the world. And yet, if it's not balanced with the expression of joy, it becomes distorted. For
Yes.
example, the love of family or religion or tribe or political party can get so distorted with all that love. And, you have to actually balance it out with joy, which actually kind of helps to liberate the whole thing beyond those sort of
Mhm.
collapsing it down into those things. So to me, it's important that that balance is consciously brought in as well.
I'm glad you said that because, it's just popped into my head there. You know, we could look at the world and kind of describe the um, all of the negativity and difficulty and upset the world is experiencing right now as very much demonstrated by a lack of joy. I mean, if we were holistic in all extents, we would be joyful and celebratory all the time. You know, we would live in that kind of way. I mean, and in fact, if someone were asked, you know, what would heaven on earth be? You know, that would be a key part of it. And I love that you said that because I hadn't thought of it quite that way before. You know, I've thought about the lack of love, but lack of joy is
Mm.
definitely very obvious in the world.
Yeah.
Certainly is. So, you know, we could talk about these topics
Mhm.
on, and I'd love to do that because it's a big subject and there's a lot to talk about. But I
Yeah.
think we've covered the groundwork for the purpose today, and
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you've been here with me, Marshall, and shared all of your great wisdom that you've you know done in explaining the new unified theories that are coming about and how they are applicable in the real world. I mean, we are a part of the real
Mhm.
world, and you've said it over and over how important that it really is to understand that we are all parts of this great whole that is a living dynamic universe, and then it could be greatly much more understood now than ever before from the things you describe in your book, Cosmometry. So, again, thank you for being here. This has just been a privilege to tap into your knowledge and your wisdom. You know, I think knowledge is important, but I've really come to understand wisdom is so valuable, and that requires us to tap into that whole that we are a part of, and then wisdom can begin to come through. Now, we
Mm.
did touch on that, and that
Yeah, that
you
feels
know,
right.
you if you want to make a final comment on that, please do.
That feels right. Yeah. I think that's a great point to make. Wisdom, because wisdom in a way is I guess what it feels like to me right now is it's a synthesis of like a higher level synthesis of knowledge and intelligence that can see that wholeness and express something that basically brings in a unified perspective and a restoration into wholeness in a way that is in right relationship. Um, yeah, that's a really great point you made there.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Well, thank you again for being here with me today, and
yeah.
keep up the good work. I'd love to
Thank you.
talk
Yeah.
about everything you're doing with the Harmonic Science Alliance. I'm sure they're doing great scientific things there. But
Just beginning. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening in the world already. That as a field of science is not formalized and recognized yet. So that's a big part of what
right,
I'm calling forth now is to recognize it as a fundamental scientific premise and a paradigm that is eternal, basically. And so there is a lot going on, and if people want to learn a little bit more about it, because I've just begun to put it out there. It's at harmonic-science.org, and there's
very good.
a new journal called Harmonic Science Perspectives that I published in December, the first issue of beginning to at least bring that knowledge out into the
Okay.
world. Yeah.
Is that the main place to for someone to learn more about you?
Not much about me specifically there. That's for the harmonic science pursuit. Cosmometry.com is where they can learn about my book. Um, and then, find me on LinkedIn and learn a bit more about what I've done over the years.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you again. And
You're
to the listening audience, have a great day and a great life.